That is cool. I work with some really cool people. And they put that together just for you because I'm here. Did you like it? Okay. Oh, thank you. The first thing I was going to say is bonjour, je m'appelle Pamela, comment ça va? And that's where it ends right there. I'm honored to be here. I want to thank Florence for inviting me. I want to thank the Digital Academy. I want to thank Nigel for recommending me. Nigel Thurlow is my boss, my spirit animal, as I tell him. If you don't know him, I highly recommend you find him on LinkedIn and follow him. He's very interesting. He's very smart. And you will see he has changed my life. So let's get started. So you saw a little bit of my history. I'm an Olympic athlete. I like this picture because Nigel says it scares him. You always want your boss to be a little bit afraid of you. So for those who are visual, here's a bunch of pictures of me. The first thing I like to point out is these sweats over here are really forgiving. This was my freshman year in college, and I was not in shape at all, believe me. And then we fast forward 5 years here where I actually won the indoor, oops, I knew I was going to do that. I have trouble with pointers. Where I won the indoor shot put title. I continued training, and as you'll see, I made the '92 Olympic team here, and I'm pictured with the president at the time here. And then I also did a lot of traveling, competed in a lot of sports. Great, Pam. So, how did I get here? I was introduced to something called the Harada method training, which I'd never heard of. And this was big for me. I had realized I'd done a lot of things to myself as a result of this training, and I worked really hard to fix myself because I realized I was broken, and I'm about to tell you how I figured that out. So before this training, I called myself the CMO, which I've coined, meaning my Chief Minimizing Officer. So what that means is I didn't share my accomplishments, I didn't tell you about me, I didn't want to stand out, and I was concerned about what others thought of me, and I avoided the limelight. There are two experiences I remember vividly, and one before when I was training for the Olympic team, I worked in IT, and I didn't tell any of my coworkers that I was training for the Olympics. Do you have any idea why I might have done that? Anybody? Thinking? I was actually afraid of being laid off. At the time, they were doing a lot of layoffs in some of the IT companies out in California, and my thought was, people have this misperception when you're training for the Olympics that all this money just comes from somewhere and you don't really need to work. Well, I'm here to tell you that is not true, and if I was not working full-time, I would have not been able to achieve my goal. So my fear was if I told someone, then when it came time to do layoffs, they would say, Pam, she's training for the Olympics, she doesn't need this job, and poof, off I went. So because of that, I stayed quiet. Another great experience I have is when I started a job after I made the Olympic team, I didn't tell anybody my history. And one of the worst things I could hear is if someone came up to me, and I think back then they used Yahoo or Ask Jeeves or some of the search engines. I see heads nodding. If someone told me they searched me, I was frozen panic. And so then I would have a conversation. Okay, let's just keep this between ourselves. We don't have to tell anybody about my history. So I'd been hiding myself for a long time, and I hadn't quite figured out what the cause of that was until I got to the Harada training. So what I did, because we're all agile and lean enthusiasts, I did a kind of Ishikawa root cause analysis on myself. I minimized my accomplishments because I didn't want to stand out. I didn't want others to be uncomfortable, because inevitably sometimes I did that and they were, because I didn't want to be put on a pedestal. Sometimes when people hear these things, they start treating you differently. And then as we continue around, the biggest thing was I didn't want anyone to think I was better than they are, because people have a tendency to do that. And last but not least, when that happens, they would not want to be my friend. And I distinctly remember in different situations in my life where people found out about me at work, and suddenly it's exciting, and then it kind of fades. And then the invitations for lunch or happy hour start to disappear. So somehow in my brain, I convinced myself if I share who I am, they're not going to accept me, so I need to hide. So I went into hiding. And I didn't realize how severely I was hiding until I took the Harada method class. Since I took it, I've now become either the chief happiness or the chief Harada officer of my life, which is pretty exciting. I embrace my accomplishments. Before the class, if you asked me, you look kind of athletic. Did you do sports? I would say yes. And you'd have to keep coming. Did you do basketball? Yes. Did you do any other sports? I did track and field. And it was like an inquisition. If you did not ask the right question, you weren't getting the information. But now, if you say you look kind of athletic, did you do sports? I hit you right between the eyes with it. Yes, I'm an Olympic athlete. And then I don't worry about it, because I realize what you do with that, I have no control over. And if for whatever reason I don't fit whatever you're hoping to have as part of your group, then that's okay. Now I stand up, I stand out, I welcome the limelight. I'm here, which is pretty amazing, and I will show you that journey. And my goal is to stop saying no to opportunities. So many times I think in our lives we get offered opportunities to go to meetups and things and help people. And I was very good at saying, no, I have to take care of my son. I got to get home. I'm not going to be able to. By the way, my son's sitting here taking pictures. He's got work to do here. But now I don't do that anymore. And the people around me know I'm not supposed to say no anymore. And trust me, they're taking advantage of it. And I will show you some of that. The biggest thing I learned after training was the difference between sharing and bragging. And I teach this in my Harada class. You'll see what it says here. Proper pride says, I'm good at this, and that's okay. Improper pride says, I'm better than you. And in my brain, I was mixing those. But now that I've figured it out, I no longer do that. And I feel it's perfectly acceptable to say, I'm good at this, I have some skills, and it's okay. I'm not worried about the bragging part. In fact, in my Harada class, I created an exercise where I tell all my students to take a label. And I have these really big labels that you put on your chest. And in a Sharpie, I tell them, write down your biggest accomplishment and put it on your chest. So they do that. I write the words Olympian, because that's what they're expecting. And so when they're done, we talk about it. And almost everybody in there feels uncomfortable. And I ask them why. And they say, well, I feel like I'm bragging. I'm like, you're not. I just asked you what your biggest accomplishment was. But there's definitely a feeling of, I don't want to share that. I don't want to wear that. I don't want people to know. So they have their own little light bulb moment about realizing that they're not embracing their accomplishments. And I think that's pretty powerful. So we'll go through these pictures here. The first one is when I started at Toyota on the left, and that was January 2018. I got hired by Toyota Connected, which was pretty exciting. And then if you go kind of down at an angle, there's a picture of me with three gentlemen. That is Nigel, my current boss, me, and then Jim Lippens. He is the person who taught me the Harada method. He's a friend of Nigel's. Nigel knows everybody. Flew him in, had him stay, and he taught us the 2-day class. So I set a goal of doing a training module in Nigel's class. Nigel teaches a class many people know as Scrum the Toyota Way. And I decided I want to be a part of that, so I created a module. So I hit that goal, and then in my class, there was one of the gentlemen who's in charge of the Dallas DevOps Day, which is a big conference. And when they asked our goals, I stood up and I said I want to do a training module in front of a group of people, and I'm excited about it. So he raised his hand and he said, great, I'll have you as a featured speaker at DevOps Day. And I thought, oh great, I wasn't expecting that. But again, since I'm not saying no, right? I said I will gladly show up. So that's us pictured on the left there. And then since I'm now telling people who I am, I told my company because nobody knew I was an Olympian. And I remember when I told Nigel, we were at the coffee bar, and I said, you know what, Nigel? I think there's something going on with this Olympic thing in Scrum, and I'm trying to figure out what my connection is. And he looks at me, what? And I said, the Olympic thing, I'm an Olympian. He had no idea. Nigel doesn't read resumes. So unless someone told him, hey, the girl you're about to interview is an Olympian, he had no idea. So he was pretty excited about it. So I did some homework, and I came up with my module and my connection between Scrum and sports. And I will show you that slide. From there, I submitted to do my talk at Agile Camp. And not just any Agile Camp. I submitted to do it in Beaverton, Oregon, at the headquarters for Nike. Having been a former track athlete, going to Nike headquarters is kind of a big deal, and I thought it was a kind of cool full circle moment. And they accepted. So this is me now working with them and teaching them a little bit about the Harada method. And then last but not least, There's some local schools that found out about me and asked me to come and participate, different middle schools and so forth. Will you come talk to the girls about self-esteem and goals and stuff? And since I'm not saying no, right? I said yes. So all of this has happened as a result of me doing that Harada class. My second goal was to become a certified Harada trainer, which I now am, and I'm now teaching others. And then you'll see the third goal I had was to train as many people as possible. I said I wanted to introduce or train at least 100 students from January of this year through June. I hit the goal of introducing people to it, as I will do with you. I think I've only trained about 45 people, and I think, yeah, the number's here, 43 people. So I'm still working on that goal. But so far, it's been pretty powerful. So this was my big ta-da. I had always felt very familiar with Scrum, and I couldn't figure out what it was, but it just felt like as soon as I learned it, I thought, I've been doing this all my life. And then I made the connection. So I set my goal on May 14th. It's a 3-month goal you set with the Harada method. And right before the Memorial holiday weekend, Nigel stuck his head into a meeting I was in, and he said, hey, I want you to do your module in 2 weeks, so have it ready. And then he dropped out. And my head exploded because I thought, but wait, I don't know what I'm going to talk about yet. So thank God, over the Memorial Day weekend, that very weekend, this came to me. So this is what I talk to people about in the training. So everybody here somewhat familiar with Scrum? Okay, so the things on the left are familiar to you: chief product owner, you've got release and roadmap planning, you've got daily stand-ups and so forth. So over here we have college athletics, and this is the tie-in for me. My chief product owner was my head coach. The assistant coach was my product owner. That's the person I worked with every day to figure out what my training was going to be, how much throwing, how much running, plyometrics, weightlifting, and so forth. The Scrum Master, and I can kind of go either way on this one, was either an assistant coach or a team captain. The dev team, of course, was my teammates. And for release and roadmap planning, what they do is you meet with your coach at the beginning of the year and you tell him your goals. Okay, I threw the shot 46.8 in high school. He'd say, what is your goal freshman year? I'd say, I'd like to get about 48 feet. And he laughed and he said, we're going for 50, which I thought was funny. Coaches always think you can do more than you think you can do. So what they do is, based on that, they have to write an athletic program and back into it. Because at the end of the year, around May or June, when you're doing nationals, you need to be peaking. So they have to back in all the training you have to do to get there, which I thought was pretty cool. And once they do that, he would give me a calendar, a month calendar, and on it, it listed what days I'm throwing shot, what days I'm throwing discus, what days I'm lifting, when I'm running. It was all planned out. So essentially, I had a month sprint that I was given to. And so then, let's see, plan for the release roadmap. Sprint planning, plan for the month. So I had my month plan. Let's see, daily stand-up, every day I would either go by the office and talk to him, or he'd come down to practice and he'd say, how are you feeling? I feel pretty good. Okay, we'll continue with the plan. So we would follow whatever we had written down for my day. And then at the end of the week, we'd want to see how we were doing. So we did competition throws. If I wasn't competing in a track meet, then we would line everything up. He'd call my name, I'd go into the ring, and I would do a competition throw, and he would measure it 3 times, and then we would do our retrospective to see where we were. Are we on target? Are we hitting the weights too hard? Are you tired? Do you have energy? And then he would adjust the plan for the upcoming week or month. So this is why Scrum was easy for me. And I didn't realize it until that weekend that I have always been doing this. And I thought this was pretty cool because I showed it to Nigel and he told me he'd never heard that before. And when your boss, he tells you that you've never heard something before, it's kind of impressive because I consider he knows most things. So that was my ta-da. This has been my progression. Harada class was May 9th and 10th of 2018. First goal delivered in just over a month. You set a 3-month goal, but I hit my goal in a month, which is pretty hard to do. And then I did some mini Harada trainings where people kind of saw me and knew what I was doing and wanted me to teach them quickly. So I started to teach people. Even before I was a certified trainer, I was teaching people how to do it. So then there's the DevOps Day conference I mentioned, right? And then the Agile Camp at Nike headquarters, the group of girls you saw in pink, that's the beautiful you. And then I taught my first Harada class this year in February. It was very exciting. So at the DevOps Day conference, there was a lady who worked for Verizon, and she called me, and she said, we're having our DevOps conference. We want a female speaker. Will you come? And I said, yes, because I'm not allowed to say no, right? So I went. And this was pretty interesting, because I got there, and she said, there's probably going to be about 50 or 60 people. Fine, I'm great. But then she said, and there'll probably be about 1,000 to 2,000 people online. And so I kind of froze, and I said, don't ever tell me how many people I'm speaking to, because it kind of messes you up. But that, at this point, was the largest audience that I've spoken to. From there, I did the DFW Leadership Meetup. Again, these were meetups I'd always said no to before, but I wasn't allowed to do that. And from that, there were two people, one worked at Ameriflex, one at Cyber Group, that invited me to come and speak to their organizations. And so I did. And for Cyber Group, it was kind of neat because it was their quarterly meeting. So all the executives were there, and they had it, on a WebEx to all their other employees and so forth. So it was kind of exciting. And then you'll see in red where we are today. It's been a great progression for me. So I believe with the Harada method, the reason I think people are successful with it is because you have to have a burning desire to get something done, to hit your goals. I was the person who makes your New Year's Eve list every New Year's. These are all the things I'm going to do, and I'm excited. And then as the year would start to go, I'd get the first one done, I'd get the second one done, and then all of a sudden I disappeared. And the list just kind of disappeared. And I'm not quite sure why, but for whatever reason, the person I used to be who achieved all their goals disappeared. So the reason I feel the Harada method worked for me is because it sets up a framework to make you successful. All right, so what is it? It's a goal. You set a personal goal. And I cannot stress enough that the goal has got to be important to you. There are companies I've talked to who want to bring me in and have them set up a company goal. And I tell them, no, I'm not doing that, because that's not how it works. It's got to be a goal that someone is really passionate about. Because if you feel strongly about it, you're more likely to push yourself forward. If it's just a corporate thing, it's probably not going to have the momentum it needs. Teaches you how to be self-reliant. I call this the Dorothy Wizard of Oz theory, where she says you've always had the power with you. You have to realize that the way you're going to be successful is realizing that you have everything you need to get there. You work with a coach, and as you can imagine, working with a coach is good for me. I love working with coaches. I had stopped doing this, but the Harada method introduced it to me, and I went back to working with a coach. In fact, I knew I was high maintenance, so instead of having one coach in the process, I set up 5. I had Nigel, I had Jim, the person that taught us, I had the guy who volunteered the DevOps Day stuff. Okay, you be a coach. I had 2 Scrum Masters where I worked who was in the class, so they knew exactly what to do. And then I also had my dad. And one of the things I learned is you'll let yourself down, but when you have that many people hoping you and pushing you and leading you in the direction, you're probably going to be successful. So what I did was I took my forms, and every week I updated them and I emailed them to them. And so I got some feedback. You need to change this. Why don't you try this? But most importantly, they encouraged me. Pam, you're doing a great job. Keep doing what you're doing. We're so proud of you. This gives you the kind of momentum to move forward. And that's why this worked for me. Part of the Harada method is you do service for yourself and service for others. It's not just about you. And you actually have to write down the service you're going to do for others. One of the things I had was that I was going to encourage my son every day, which I started doing more. And then I was a Scrum Master at the time. I had to work with my teams. I would bring them chocolate. We would go out and have coffee. All these different things I had to plan out because guess what? I said I was going to do it in this method, so now I have to do it. The thing I like about the method is it tries to work on all of you. It's not just your work life or your home life or your family life or your psychological life. It's everything. So this is the book that I actually got and read after I did the training. And to give you the history, Takeshi Harada is the person who wrote the book, and he created the method. Takeshi Harada went to work in Osaka at a very depressed school, and he became the track coach, which is perfect for me. And one of the things he noticed was this was a very tough area. None of the kids had self-esteem. They didn't believe they'd ever amount to anything, and they just were kind of going through the motions. So he tried to work with them to improve their spirit and their motivation, but it wasn't working. So then he thought, well, you know, maybe something's going on at home. Let me go meet the parents and see, maybe they can be the connection to help us. So when he met the parents, it was even worse. They never thought their kid would amount to anything. You know, they just wanted them to stay out of trouble, and there weren't a lot of goals. So he studied Olympic athletes and took some of the ways they achieve goals and put it as part of his Harada method. And that's where all of this comes from. As I mentioned, you're focusing on your mind, your body, and your spirit, not just one particular area. This is a picture of Norman Bodek, and he is the one who translated the book. Takeshi Harada came up with the method, and he had the first version of the book in Japanese. Norman flew to Japan because he wanted to meet him, because he'd studied him. And the way I understand it, Mr. Harada was so impressed with Norman that they said they would write the American version of the book, and that's the book I just showed you, which I have. One of the things I find probably really got to me was that when you set your goal, you have to start going deep and figure out why you've set it. So it's not just, I want to do this cool thing. You figure out, well, what are the tangible things you're going to gain from it? And what are the tangible things society or others are going to get, as well as the intangible? And I think I can remember on some of my forums, I'd said, you know, I'd be very proud of myself, or I would help the company, or maybe this could turn into some sort of training thing, which is funny because it has. So these are all the things I put down as what I wanted to have happen and why I wanted to get my goal. And it sort of gave me a little bit more push, because it wasn't just, I have a goal and I'm going to go do it. You have to go deep and go into different layers to figure out how you get there. This is just a high summary of it. You set your goal, you figure out why, and then you do your analysis. This is also very good. You have to figure out in your past, when you set goals, why were you not successful? And then once you write that down, you come up with countermeasures that say, hey, if this shows up again, what are you going to do differently? And I had never done that before. Again, we set a goal and off we go. And even some of the methods I'd use, Stephen Covey, getting things done and so forth, I hadn't gotten to this sort of depth before. In training, our teacher put this up. What's your life goal? Do you guys know what your life goal is? Some? Well, I didn't, and I was mad. First I thought, well, who are you to ask me what my life goal is? And then I thought, well, wait a minute. What is my life goal? And that's one of the things I realized. You can probably have more than one. Maybe when you were younger, you had one goal, and as you get older, you change it. But other than me being Olympian, that's all I had. I didn't really have a clear direction and purpose. So this was another thing that got me thinking, okay, I got to figure out what's going on with me. Somehow I've disappeared in here, and I've got to bring me back out. These are my actual forms. So this is the long-term goal form. This is what you will fill out with your goal. You'll see here, this is the date I started, the 14th. My goal, develop a training module showing how I connected teamwork with other teams and the Scrum framework. My goal is to write it and share this training with more than one group of people. So I started here with my Scrum team, the Scrum Masters. That's about 20 people at my company, so I started there, setting different levels. And then Brews and News, that's a happy hour we have for our company where they get up and they interview different people, talk about different subjects, things in the company. And then the funny thing is, I said I would share it at a meetup, but I didn't do that because I wasn't quite going to the meetups yet. I did that later. And then here is the highest goal, was sharing it with a larger audience. And this is the date I actually did the Nigel's Camp and training. Now this is another form you do, and this is called the 36 by 36. I know it probably looks a little intimidating, but what you do is you set up 6 focus areas, which are in the aqua, for what you want to work on. What are the areas that are going to support you achieving your goal? For here, since I'd never developed any kind of coursework, I set that as one thing. And then I also had just some general research and study. And around it, you set up tasks and routines that you're going to do. And one of the nice things is you can scrum this process. So you can set up sprints, and you track it, and you can see how you're doing, and you can adjust it. And for the routines, you figure out how frequently you're going to do something, whereas a task, you say, I'm going to get this done by this date. Like, I think, read The Toyota Way. I'm going to get it done by this date. Truth be told, I haven't totally finished reading The Toyota Way, but I'm almost done. But that is still something I'd listed on my form. This is Zig Ziglar's wheel. And one of the things he talks about is that these are sort of the important things in a person's life. And when one of them gets out of kilter, it affects everything. And I think this is similar to those 6 focus areas that I was showing you. And I show this in my training too, because people say I have no idea what areas I want to focus on. Usually you want to do your health on some level, maybe if you have family, maybe you want to do something for work. It really depends on what your main goal is. These are some of the goals that were achieved by the students. Learned a new language, purchased a new home. The one I'm probably most proud of is the bottom right corner. There was a gentleman who worked in Toyota, and that's a very large, hierarchical organization. And normally when you apply for a different job, you go to the next level. Say if you're 16, you go 17. If you're feeling pretty good, you go 18. Well, he took my class, and then he applied for a job that I think was 4 levels above where he was, which is a big jump. I didn't even know he was doing it. And then in a few weeks, he came back to class, and he hugged me. And I said, why are you hugging me? And he said, I applied for a job 4 levels higher, and I got it. And I would have never done that if I hadn't taken your class. And to me, that's powerful. To think that all of this that I've done has now helped him catapult his career, it's pretty special. For folks who have trouble figuring out, well, geez, I don't know what kind of goal to set, this is some examples, maybe something you're interested in where you could focus. And then I have some examples of goals here. I'm going to kind of fast forward through these because I know we have a time crunch. So this is Shohei Ohtani, and he's probably one of the more famous people who use the Harada method. They taught the Harada method to him in high school, and this is what he used. He was a famous baseball player. He's now a pitcher for the Los Angeles Angels, and in high school, he set the record, and I think he still has it, as the fastest pitch, 99 miles per hour. When he came out of high school, it was a big deal. He was recruited by major leagues in the United States as well in Japan. And everyone thought he was going to go pro in the United States, but he decided to go pro in Japan. And he did that for a few years. And then when he decided, okay, now I'm going to make the leap into Major League Baseball, it was a really big deal figuring out what team he would go to. It turns out the reason he says he picked the Angels was because of the way they treated him, the family atmosphere, how he felt when he visited the organization, how they treated his family. So a lot of it was wrapped up into what he felt was important to reach his next goal, take its next step. We're going to talk about the 8th waste. You guys are lean experts, so we know all about waste. They say the 8th biggest waste is the underutilization of people's potential and talent. We're all trying to be happy at work. If you look at different engagement polls, the numbers haven't been good. This is a slide from 2018 that shows that 64% of people are not engaged. This is a slide from HR.com, and they have a definition of engagement, and they call that the willingness to give one's best at work. So when polled, they asked, well, where do you feel people are? Only 9% strongly felt that people are giving their discretionary effort, their best work. That's not a great sign. I have heard that some of the polls now are a little bit higher, but they haven't drastically changed. In this slide, it shows, well, let's measure engagement based on the size of your organization. And you'll see the smaller companies have a higher level of engagement. And I kind of agree with this, because before I went to Toyota, I worked for a small company, 50 people. We all knew each other. We went out to eat all the time. We had events together. People went over people's homes and stuff. It was a different kind of feeling. I think sometimes when you get to the larger organizations, people have a tendency to feel like they're more of just a number versus really part of the organization and the solution. And to the right, you'll see that they have evidence linking engagement and performance. So companies are trying to get people more engaged and to perform better. These are some of the things that I've listed that companies do to improve engagement. And fortunately for me, Toyota Connected does a lot of these things. For an employee like me, I think it works because I'm already a motivated and optimistic type of person. So anything you do for me, I'm grateful for. One of the things that it does scare me is that there are people who get some of these benefits and they don't really appreciate them. I'll give you an example. At Toyota Connected, they serve us lunch every day. Healthy lunch, salads from all different over, that we don't have to pay for, meaning the employees don't have to pay for. And I've been in line, and I've heard people say, "Oh God, not this again." And my eyes get big, like, don't do that, don't do that. This is a free lunch, be grateful, don't do that. Because my fear is the CEO who comes in line is gonna hear that and decide, you know what? We don't need to do this lunch thing anymore. I don't think they want it. It could happen. So I bring this slide up because I think these things are important and they work, but I think there's some other things that might help as well. And of course, the first one I list is help with goals, help with figuring out what employees want to do, creating opportunities for them to help others. I think a lot of companies that do volunteering and have volunteer efforts have a tendency to have a little bit higher of engagement level. Assigning a mentor. I was just talking to someone about how companies onboard employees. One of the things we try to do is have someone be a buddy and hang out with them and teach them the ropes. And that's great, and I see that happen, but it doesn't usually last that long. Usually you have a buddy for a couple of weeks, and then that kind of rolls off. Well, I think it would be great if you had a mentor at the company and you stayed having a mentor. You don't hit a point where all of a sudden you don't need mentorship anymore. I think it's important to make it safe to admit mistakes. We've talked about that. And then allowing families to participate. I think they're more liberal at allowing that over in Europe and so forth, but one of the things I've noticed is they're starting to reduce that more and more in the States. All right. I feel mentoring and coaching is key, and one of the things I'm going to recommend to you is that if you don't have a coach, find one. Because honestly, I didn't. All those years of being an athlete, and when I got in my professional career, I stopped having a coach. So there are many people who offer services depending on what your line of work is. You can find them on the internet. Just having someone that's outside of your organization that you can talk to and plan things with, I really think it makes all the difference. There's a term called speaking greatness into someone, and I think that's what good coaches do. I started having greatness spoken into me by my family, and then it became coaches, and then it transitioned to great bosses. And I think currently I have a great boss, and he's the reason I'm actually standing here today. This is my son, and I'm speaking greatness into him. He does Taekwondo, and at one point on one of the lower belts, he told me he wanted to stop, and I thought, no, you can't stop. Everyone knows your mommy's an Olympic athlete. I gotta have you do something. We gotta figure something out. So I realized all of his belts and all of his certificates, they were in a drawer on the floor somewhere. I wasn't treating them with the amount of respect and greatness that I think they garnered. So this is our family room. The TV is right here. So I made this his wall of fame. So all of his stuff is up. And now this is a picture more recently. He's got a lot more. And even now, this has moved down here, and we've got a whole nother rack here, and he's all the way up to red belt. So he's very close to being a black belt. Since we started doing this and encouraging him, I think he's only mentioned wanting to stop maybe once. And I remind him, he said, we were gonna get to black belt, we gotta hold our commitments. So this is working. And then I thought, you know what? Where's my stuff? I'm this, quote, great athlete. My stuff was in the garage, y'all. So I fixed that. So now on the other side of my office, when you walk in the house, this is me, right between the eyes. Oh, you were an Olympian? Yes, I was. Oh, that's great. Tell me about it. Okay. I'm owning it, and from that, opportunities can come. This is kind of a summary of steps for the Harada method. This is more than you have to do, but I thought it was a good way of portraying it. And in particular, the analyzation of yourself and what's getting in your way. We all have things getting in our way, keeping us from being successful. And with the Harada method, for me, it helped me get out of my own way. This is bonus content. And the last slide is the Olympic Creed, which I usually say at the end of my presentations because I think it's important. The most important thing in the Olympic Games is not to win, but to take part. Just as the most important thing in life is not the triumph, but the struggle. The essential thing is not to have conquered, but to have fought well. And we're up to questions. Where's my question slide? Thank you.